The knock came at dusk, so faint that Henry Grayson almost missed it over the crackling of his fireplace. He set down the leather harness he'd been mending and listened, wondering if the wind had thrown a branch against the heavy wooden door of his cabin. Then it came again, 3 hesitant taps that barely registered against the solid pine. Henry rose from his chair, his massive frame unfolding to its full height of 6 feet 4 inches. Living alone on the slopes above Skidoo, California, he'd grown accustomed to solitude since returning from the war 5 years ago in 1871. Visitors were rare this far up the mountain, and those who did come usually announced themselves with hearty shouts, not timid knocking. When he opened the door, the woman on his threshold swayed like a sapling in a storm. She was small, maybe 5 feet 2 at most, with dark hair that hung in tangles around a face marked by exhaustion and something worse. Even in the fading light, he could see the purple bruise spreading across her left cheekbone and the split in her lower lip that had recently bled. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse and desperate. "I need work, any work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, anything you need. I won't ask for much. Just food and a place to sleep that's not the forest floor." Henry's jaw tightened as his eyes traced the other signs of violence he now noticed. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing another bruise that disappeared beneath the fabric. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small bundle that appeared to contain all her worldly possessions. One of her wrists bore the unmistakable marks of rope burns. "Who did this to you?" The question came out rougher than he intended, and she flinched. "It doesn't matter. He can't find me here. No one knows about this cabin. I walked for 2 days through the mountains. Please, I just need work. I can earn my keep. I promise I won't be trouble." The words tumbled out faster now, edged with panic, as if she expected him to slam the door in her face at any moment. Instead, Henry stepped back and opened the door wider. "You're safe now," he said, his voice gentler this time. "Come inside. You don't need to earn anything. Just come in and get warm." She stared at him with wide eyes, clearly uncertain whether to trust this offer. Henry couldn't blame her. He knew what he looked like, a giant of a man with a thick beard and hands that could snap a branch as thick as her arm. Years of trapping and hunting in these mountains had turned him into something wild himself, more comfortable with animals than people. "I'm Henry Grayson," he said, trying to make his voice as non-threatening as possible. "I live alone up here. Have for years. Nobody's going to hurt you under my roof, I give you my word on that." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she stepped across the threshold, her movements careful and pained. As she passed into the firelight, Henry got a better look at the damage. There were more bruises on her arms, and she walked with a slight limp that suggested injuries he couldn't see. "What's your name?" he asked, closing the door against the mountain chill. Violet Turner." She stood just inside the door, still clutching her bundle, looking ready to bolt at the slightest wrong move. "Well, Miss Turner, first thing is to get you fed and those injuries tended to. When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning. I had some bread I took when I left." Henry nodded and gestured toward the chair by the fire. "Sit down before you fall down. I've got stew that's been simmering all day and clean water from the spring." Violet moved to the chair with obvious reluctance to accept charity, but her body betrayed her, practically collapsing into the seat once she reached it. Henry ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her with a chunk of bread he'd baked 2 days ago. She ate like someone who'd been starved, then forced herself to slow down, embarrassed by her own hunger. Henry busied himself at his workbench, giving her space and privacy to eat without feeling watched. When he heard the spoon scrape the bottom of the empty bowl, he brought her another portion without comment. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm sorry. I don't mean to take advantage of your kindness. You're not taking advantage of anything. Anyone running through these mountains for 2 days needs food and rest. The questions can wait until morning if you prefer. Violet looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something other than fear in her expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe just relief at finding a moment of safety in what must have been a terrifying ordeal. I should tell you, she said quietly, in case he comes looking. My husband, Thomas Turner, we had a small ranch about 30 miles east of here, near the mining camps. He started drinking heavy after his brother died in a cave-in. Got mean with it. Tonight he came home drunk, and I knew if I didn't leave, he'd kill me eventually. Her voice remained steady, but Henry saw her hands shake as she set down the spoon. I took what I could carry and ran. Headed into the mountains because I knew he wouldn't follow far on foot, and I heard there were trappers and miners up here who might need help with cooking or washing. I didn't know about your cabin specifically. I just kept walking uphill until I saw your light. Henry pulled over another chair and sat down, careful to keep a respectful distance. He won't find you here. My cabin isn't on any map, and the only people who know about it are a few trappers who pass through in winter. Even if he came looking, he'd never make it this far up the mountain without knowing the trails. You don't know Thomas. He can be determined when he's angry. I spent 3 years hunting Confederate raiders through mountain country during the war. If your husband comes up here looking for trouble, he'll wish he hadn't. But I don't think he will. Men like that, they're brave when they're hitting someone who can't fight back. Out here, he'd be in my world, not his. Something in Violet's expression shifted. You were a soldier. Union Army, 3rd Cavalry, fought mostly in Missouri and Arkansas. Came out here after Appomattox because I'd had enough of towns and people and everything that came with them. Found this piece of mountain and built this cabin with my own hands. Been here ever since. Don't you get lonely? Henry considered the question. Sometimes, but lonely's better than being around folks who remind you of things you'd rather forget. At least, that's what I told myself for a long time. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling and settling. Henry noticed Violet's eyes growing heavy, her body finally relaxing now that food and warmth were working their magic. You can have the bed, he said, standing. I'll sleep out here by the fire. There's a privacy screen you can change behind, and I've got a clean nightshirt that'll be too big but better than sleeping in that torn dress. I can't take your bed. You've already done too much. Miss Turner, I insist. You need proper rest, and that bed's got a good mattress stuffed with pine needles and grass. Out here by the fire is plenty comfortable for me. Done it many times when I've had trappers stay over during bad weather. Too exhausted to argue further, Violet accepted. Henry showed her the sleeping area, separated from the main room by a partition he'd built from pine planks. He provided the nightshirt and a basin of warm water for washing, then retreated to give her privacy. While she prepared for bed, Henry spread out his bedroll near the fireplace and checked the door's heavy bar, making sure it was secure. The cabin was solid, built to withstand mountain winters and the occasional bear that got too curious. No drunk rancher was getting through that door without a lot of noise and effort. When Violet emerged from behind the partition, swimming in his nightshirt with her hair brushed out and hanging loose around her shoulders, Henry was struck by how young she looked. Couldn't be more than 22 or 23 at most, too young to have that much pain written in her eyes. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking? He said. 22. I married Thomas when I was 19. He was different then, or maybe I just didn't see what he really was. She paused at the edge of the partition. How old are you? 27. Old enough to know better about most things, still learning about the rest. A small smile crossed her face, the first he'd seen. It transformed her features, giving him a glimpse of who she might be without the weight of fear and pain bearing down on her. "Good night, Mr. Grayson, and thank you. I mean that truly." "Good night, Miss Turner. Sleep as long as you need. There's no schedule up here except what the sun and seasons dictate." He listened as she settled into the bed, heard the small sigh of relief as her battered body found comfort in the soft mattress. Then he lay down on his bedroll, staring at the ceiling beams he'd hewn himself from mountain timber. For the first time in 5 years, his cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. Morning came with golden light streaming through the east-facing window. Henry woke to the smell of coffee brewing, which confused him until he remembered his guest. He sat up to find Violet already dressed in her torn clothes, tending to the fire and the coffee pot hanging over it. "You didn't have to do that," he said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Old habits. I'm used to being up before dawn. And you said I was safe here, but I still feel like I should be useful." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "I hope I didn't use too much of your supply. I trade furs for coffee and other supplies in town twice a year. Got plenty." He accepted the cup and took a sip. It was good coffee, better than he usually made for himself. "You've got a talent for this." "My mother taught me. She ran a boarding house in San Francisco before she passed. Said good coffee could make the difference between a pleasant guest and a difficult one." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, as the cabin warmed with the morning sun. Henry studied Violet in the better light, noting that the bruises looked worse today as they ripened into deeper shades of purple and yellow. Her lip was swollen, and she moved with the careful precision of someone nursing sore ribs. "I've got some salve that'll help with those bruises," he said. "Made it from herbs and bear fat. Not pretty, but it works. I'd appreciate that. Though I hate to keep taking from you without giving anything in return." "You want to give something in return? Then rest and heal. That's what I need from you right now." Violet looked at him with those serious eyes, seeming to measure his words for hidden meanings or expectations. Whatever she found satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "All right. But after I'm healed, I do need work. Real work. I can't stay here indefinitely as your charity case. I've got to figure out what comes next. We'll talk about that when the time comes. For now, let's focus on getting you healthy." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy rhythm. Henry went about his usual tasks of checking his trap lines, chopping wood, and maintaining his cabin and supplies. Violet rested, read from his small collection of books, and gradually began helping with small tasks despite his protests. She had a quick mind and capable hands, he discovered. When she offered to mend his clothes, he reluctantly agreed, expecting adequate work. Instead, she returned his shirts with repairs so neat they were nearly invisible. When she asked if she could organize his cluttered storage area, he came back from checking traps to find everything systematically arranged and labeled. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, looking at the transformed space. "I wanted to. It helps me feel less like a burden." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "Besides, I was going crazy just sitting around. I'm not used to being idle. Your ribs still bothering you, less than before. That salve really does work, even if it smells like a wet bear." Henry laughed, surprised by the sound. When was the last time he'd laughed in this cabin? "It is pretty pungent, but effective." As the days turned into a week, Henry found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each day. Violet had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, and she was curious about everything, asking questions about the mountains, the animals, his trapping techniques, and the plants he used for medicine and food. "How did you learn all this?" she asked one evening as he showed her which mushrooms were safe to eat and which would kill you. trial and error, mostly. And an old Miwok man named Running Deer who probably saved my life a dozen times over my first winter up here. I knew mountain country from the war, but this terrain was different, and I was too proud to admit I was in over my head. He found me half frozen in a ravine after a storm and taught me how to really live in these mountains. Is he still around? No, he passed 3 winters ago. But I think of him often, especially when I'm using something he taught me. Violet was quiet for a moment. It must be nice, having good memories of someone like that, someone who helped you without expecting anything in return. The wistfulness in her voice made Henry's chest tighten. You'll have good memories again. The bad ones don't disappear, but you can build new ones that matter more. She looked up at him, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. They were both people who'd been damaged by their pasts, both hiding in their own ways. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to hide alone. 2 weeks after Violet's arrival, Henry came back from the trap line to find her sitting outside the cabin in the afternoon sun, her face tilted up to catch the warmth. The bruises had faded to yellowish-green shadows, and the split on her lip had healed. She looked healthier, with color in her cheeks and steadiness in her movements. "You look better," he said, sitting down beside her on the bench he'd built from a split log. "I feel better, stronger, like maybe I can figure out what to do next." She turned to face him. "Henry, I can't keep staying here without contributing. It's not right. You said you'd discuss work when I was healed. Well, I'm healed." He'd known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it if he was honest with himself. The cabin felt alive with her in it, and the thought of her leaving left a hollow feeling in his chest. "What kind of work are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "I could help you with the trapping. Not running the lines, I know that's dangerous and requires knowledge I don't have. But preparing the furs, cooking, maintaining the cabin, growing a garden next spring. You're doing everything yourself when you could be more efficient with help. I don't have money to pay wages. I don't need money. I need a place to stay and food to eat and something to do that makes me feel worthwhile. We could be partners of sorts. You handle the hunting and trapping, I handle the home tasks. We split the proceeds from the furs when you trade them." Henry considered this. "Your husband might still be looking for you. Staying here permanently would be risky. Less risky than going to a town where someone might recognize me and tell Thomas where I am. Up here, who would know? Who would care?" She had a point. The few trappers who passed through wouldn't ask questions about a woman living in his cabin. Mountain folk minded their own business as a general rule. "All right," he said slowly. "We can try it, see how it works through the winter, but this is a partnership, not employment. We're equals in this arrangement." Violet's face lit up with a smile that made his heart do something complicated in his chest. Partners then. Equal shares, equal say. They shook hands on it, her small hand disappearing into his large one. The touch sent warmth up his arm that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. As autumn deepened into winter, their partnership flourished. Violet proved to be an invaluable help, taking over all the domestic tasks that Henry had always rushed through or neglected entirely. The cabin became cleaner and more organized. Meals became varied and delicious instead of the same basic stew he'd eaten for years. She learned how to prepare the pelts he brought back, stretching and scraping them with a skill that improved daily. More than that, she became his companion. Long winter evenings were spent by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in San Francisco, about her mother's boarding house and the colorful characters who'd passed through it. About her father, a failed gold prospector who died when she was 12, leaving her mother to support them alone. Henry shared stories of his childhood in Illinois, his parents' farm, and the younger brother who died of typhoid when Henry was 15. He talked about the war more than he'd ever talked about it, finding that Violet listened without judgment, understanding that some experiences left scars no salve could heal. "You ever regret coming out here?" she asked one snowy December evening. "Cutting yourself off from everything?" "I did at first. Thought I was punishing myself, maybe. After the things I'd done in the war, the things I'd seen, I didn't feel like I deserved normal life with normal people. The mountains felt right for someone like me. And now—" Henry looked at her across the firelight, at the way the flames brought out auburn highlights in her dark hair, at the serenity that had replaced the fear in her expression. "Now I think maybe I was just waiting for the right reason to make this cabin a home instead of a hiding place." Violet held his gaze, color rising in her cheeks. "Henry, I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing from what that man did to you. I'm not asking for anything, Violet. I just want you to know that you've changed things for me, changed how this place feels, how I feel." She set down her mending and moved closer to him, settling on the hearthstones near his chair. "It's not too soon. Or maybe it is by conventional standards, but nothing about our situation is conventional. You saved my life, Henry. And then you gave me space to remember who I was before Thomas tried to break me. That's worth more than I can ever repay. You don't owe me anything. I know. That's what makes this different." She reached up and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "With Thomas, everything was about debt and obligation and ownership. With you, it's about choice. And I'm choosing to tell you that you've changed things for me too. I came here running from one life and found the possibility of another one I actually want." Henry lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "What kind of life do you want?" "This one. With you, in this cabin on this mountain, if you'll have me." In answer, Henry drew her up into his arms, mindful of her still healing ribs, and kissed her with all the tenderness and longing he'd been holding back for weeks. She melted into him, her hands coming up to frame his bearded face, kissing him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Violet laughed softly. "I've wanted you to do that for at least a week. Why didn't you say something?" "Because I needed to be sure it was real and not just gratitude or dependence. I needed to know that what I feel for you is genuine." "And is it?" "Yes. I love you, Henry Grayson. I love your gentleness and your strength and the way you see me as a person, not a possession. I love how you talk to the animals when you think I can't hear, and how you always make sure I eat before you do. I love this life we're building together." Henry felt something inside him unlock, a door he'd kept barred for years swinging open to let in light and air and possibility. "I love you too, Violet Turner. Never thought I'd say those words to anyone, but they're true. You're the best thing that's ever knocked on my door." They held each other close as snow fell outside and the fire crackled beside them. Two people who'd been broken by their pasts finding wholeness in each other. Christmas came, their first together. Henry hiked down to Skidoo and returned with supplies and a few carefully chosen gifts. Fabric for a new dress, a book of poetry, and real coffee beans instead of his usual grounds. Violet had knitted him a warm scarf from yarn she'd unraveled and respun from an old blanket, and made him a new shirt that actually fit his large frame properly. They celebrated simply, with a good meal and the exchange of gifts, but it felt more meaningful than any holiday Henry could remember. Having someone to celebrate with made all the difference. As winter deepened, they grew closer in every way. Their kisses became more frequent and passionate, though Henry was always careful to let Violet set the pace, knowing she needed to reclaim her own sense of agency after what she'd endured with Thomas. One January night, During a blizzard that howled outside the cabin walls, Violet came to him as he prepared his bedroll by the fire. "I don't want you to sleep out here anymore," she said quietly. "I want you in that bed with me. I want us to be together properly, as husband and wife should be." Henry stood slowly. "We're not married. We are in every way that matters, and if you want to make it official, we can hike down to Skidoo when the weather clears and find a preacher. But Henry, I'm ready. I want this. I want you." He searched her face for any sign of doubt or obligation and found only certainty and desire. "Are you sure? Because we can wait as long as you need." "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." That night, they came together with tenderness and passion. Henry treating her like something precious, Violet discovering that physical love could be joyful and mutual instead of painful and one-sided. They learned each other's bodies slowly, carefully, building intimacy that went beyond the physical act to something deeper and more profound. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms under the warm quilts, Violet traced patterns on Henry's chest. "Thank you for being patient with me. For letting me choose this on my own terms. Always," he promised. "That's what love should be, a choice made freely every day." When the weather cleared in February, they made the journey down to Skidoo together. It was Violet's first time off the mountain since she'd arrived 7 months earlier. She was nervous about being seen, worried that someone might recognize her and word would get back to Thomas. Henry held her hand as they approached the town. "If you want to turn back, we can. I don't need a piece of paper to know you're mine and I'm yours. No, I want to do this properly. I want to be your wife in the eyes of the law. Thomas can't claim me anymore, not legally. I told you he started drinking after his brother died, but what I didn't tell you was that he blamed me for it. Said I was bad luck. The drinking was just an excuse for what he wanted to do anyway." "Did you ever love him?" Violet considered the question. "I thought I did when I married him. He could be charming when he wanted to be. But looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of having my own home and family after my mother died. I was alone and scared, and he seemed like safety. I was wrong." "You're not wrong about us." "No, I'm not. What we have is real." They found a circuit preacher in Skidoo who asked no questions when Henry explained they wanted to be married. The ceremony was simple, conducted in the back room of the general store with the proprietor and his wife as witnesses. Henry had no ring to offer, but Violet didn't care. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Henry kissed her with witnesses present, she felt like she was finally free of her past. The marriage certificate went into Henry's coat pocket, legal proof that Violet was now his wife. They celebrated with a meal at the town's small restaurant, then purchased supplies for the journey back up the mountain. As they were loading their packs, a man approached them. He was tall but gone to fat, with bloodshot eyes and whiskey on his breath even at midday. Henry felt Violet go rigid beside him. Well, if it isn't my runaway wife," Thomas Turner said, his voice carrying the false heartiness of a mean drunk trying to seem friendly. "Been looking for you, Violet. Time to come home." Henry stepped between them, his considerable bulk blocking Thomas's view of Violet. "She's not your wife anymore. We were just married this morning. She's Violet Grayson now, and she's not going anywhere with you." Thomas's face darkened. "The hell she is. I never signed no divorce papers." "That marriage isn't legal." The preacher, who'd followed them out to say goodbye, spoke up. "Actually, sir, I checked the county records before performing the ceremony. A divorce decree was filed 6 months ago in your name, signed by you, dissolving your marriage to Violet Turner. The marriage I just performed is entirely legal." Thomas sputtered. "That's a lie. I never signed nothing." "Perhaps you were intoxicated and don't remember. Regardless, it's on file and properly notarized. This woman is free to marry as she chooses, and she's chosen Mr. Grayson." Henry didn't know what magic the preacher was working, whether there really was a divorce decree, or if this was an act of kindness from a man who could read the situation clearly. Either way, he was grateful. "If you've got a problem with that, take it up with the territorial court," Henry said, his voice low and dangerous. "But if you come near my wife again, if you so much as speak her name in my presence, you'll regret it. Are we clear?" Thomas looked between Henry's imposing figure and Violet's determined face. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him that this was a battle he'd lost, because he backed away, muttering curses. "Thank you," Violet said to the preacher once Thomas had staggered out of sight. The older man smiled. "Sometimes the Lord's work requires a bit of creative interpretation. That man had the mark of violence on him, and you had the mark of it received. I trust the divorce decree will be properly filed by week's end, backdated 6 months. No court will question it, and even if they did, no judge in California would force a woman back to a man who beats her." Henry shook the preacher's hand firmly, pressing extra money into his palm. "You're a good man, just doing what's right. Now get your bride home, Mr. Grayson, before the weather turns." They climbed back up the mountain, Violet looking over her shoulder frequently until they were deep enough into the wilderness that pursuit would be impossible. Only when the cabin came into view did she finally relax. "It's really over," she said wonderingly. "He can't claim me anymore. I'm truly free." "You were always free," Henry said, pulling her into his arms. "That man had no real hold on you except fear, and you broke that when you ran. But yes, now it's official. You're mine, and I'm yours, and no one can say different." That night, they consummated their marriage again, but this time without any shadow of the past hanging over them. Violet was uninhibited and joyful, laughing as Henry picked her up and carried her to bed, then sighing with pleasure as he made love to her slowly and thoroughly. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered afterwards. "So good and right and perfect." "Every night for the rest of our lives," Henry promised. "I'll love you every way I know how, and you'll never doubt it." Spring came to the mountain, bringing wildflowers and newborn animals and the hard work of preparing furs for trade. Henry taught Violet how to ride the horse he kept for trips to town, and they explored the mountain together, finding hidden valleys and pristine streams that even he hadn't discovered in his years alone. She had a knack for finding useful plants, learning quickly which ones were edible or medicinal. Together, they established a garden near the cabin, taking advantage of a south-facing slope where sun and good soil met. Violet planted vegetables and herbs, talking to them as they grew, coaxing them upward. "You're going to spoil those plants," Henry teased, watching her fuss over bean sprouts. "Plants grow better when they're loved and talked to. My mother taught me that." She could grow anything, even in the middle of San Francisco. Well, she raised a daughter who can do the same, it seems. Their partnership extended beyond the domestic sphere. Violet proved to be an excellent shot with a rifle, taking to target practice with natural skill. By summer, she was confident enough to hunt small game near the cabin, supplementing their food supply and taking pride in her contributions. One warm July evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Violet turned to Henry with a soft smile. "I have something to tell you." The tone of her voice made his heart skip. "What is it?" "I'm with child. Due in late winter, I think." Joy flooded through Henry like nothing he'd ever experienced. He pulled her into his lap, cradling her carefully. "Truly, we're having a baby, truly." "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Violet, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a wife, and now a child. I feel like the richest man in California." She kissed him deeply. "I was nervous to tell you, worried it might be too much or too soon. It's perfect timing. By late winter, the worst of the weather will be past, and we'll have a whole spring and summer for our baby to grow strong in the mountain air." He placed his hand over her still flat belly. "Boy or girl doesn't matter, as long as you both come through healthy. I'll need to be more careful. No more climbing around the mountain or heavy lifting. I'll take care of everything. You just focus on growing our baby." As her pregnancy progressed, Henry became almost comically protective. Violet laughed at his fussing but secretly loved how attentive he was, always making sure she was comfortable, fed, and rested. He built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there wasn't a splinter to be found, then carved small animals into the headboard with surprising artistic skill. "I didn't know you could do this," Violet said, running her fingers over the detailed elk and bear he'd carved. "Never had reason to try before. Turns out I like working with my hands to create instead of just survive." By October, Violet's belly had swelled unmistakably, and she moved with the careful waddle of heavily pregnant women everywhere. Henry made sure they were stocked with extra supplies in case the baby came during a storm. He'd helped birth calves and foals during his farm childhood, but he knew human birth was different, potentially dangerous without a doctor or midwife. "Promise me something," Violet said one evening as they lay in bed, Henry's hand resting on her belly to feel the baby kick. "If something goes wrong during the birth, you save the baby. Do whatever you must, but save our child. Nothing's going to go wrong. But if it does, promise me." Henry pulled her close, his heart tight with fear he tried not to show. "I promise I'll do everything possible to save you both. But Violet, I need you. Our baby needs you. So you fight, you hear me? You fight to stay with us." "I will. I just needed to know that if I can't, our child will be loved and protected." "Loved and protected always. You have my word." Winter settled over the mountain in earnest. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and Henry kept the fire burning constantly. Violet spent her days knitting tiny clothes and preparing supplies for the baby's arrival. She seemed serene and happy, despite the physical discomforts of late pregnancy. On a cold February night during a gentle snowfall, Violet's labor began. Henry had never been so terrified in his life, not during the war, not during his first winter alone on the mountain, never. But he forced himself to stay calm for Violet's sake, heating water and preparing clean cloths as she'd instructed him to do weeks earlier. The labor was long and hard. Violet bore it with remarkable courage, though Henry could see the pain in her eyes and the exhaustion building as hours passed. He held her hand, wiped her brow, encouraged her through each contraction. "I can see the head," he said finally, positioned to catch the baby. "One more push, my love. You're almost there." With a final tremendous effort, Violet pushed, and suddenly Henry was holding a tiny, slippery baby who let out a lusty cry of protest at being thrust into the cold world. "It's a boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son, Violet." He quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him on Violet's chest. She was exhausted but radiant, tears streaming down her face as she looked at their child. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Look at him, Henry. We made this beautiful boy. You did the hard part. You were so brave, Violet, so strong." Their son had a thick shock of dark hair like his mother and blue eyes that would probably change color over time. His tiny hands waved in the air, and when Henry offered a finger, the baby gripped it with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Violet asked. "I was thinking about my brother James, and your mother was Sarah, wasn't she? Maybe James Samuel Grayson. James Samuel Grayson. I love it. Hello, little James. Welcome to your home." The baby settled into life on the mountain as if born to it. He was healthy and strong, growing quickly under Violet's devoted care. Henry marveled at how naturally Violet took to motherhood, how she seemed to understand what James needed almost before he cried for it. Watching his wife nurse their son, seeing her sing lullabies in the rocking chair Henry had built specially for her, observing the gentle way she bathed him and dressed him in the tiny clothes she'd made, Henry fell in love with her all over again in new and deeper ways. Spring came again, their second together. James was old enough now to be awake and alert for longer periods, his eyes tracking the movement around him with infant curiosity. Henry would hold him while Violet worked in the garden, pointing out birds and telling him about the mountain that was his birthplace. "He won't remember any of this," Violet said, laughing as Henry earnestly explained about elk migration patterns to their 3-month-old son. "But I'll remember. And someday, when he's older, I'll tell him again, and it'll be true that I've been teaching him about this mountain his whole life." Life settled into a new rhythm, challenging but deeply satisfying. They were isolated from the world, but they had everything they needed. Each other, their son, the mountain that provided for them, and the cabin that sheltered them. When James was 6 months old, they made a trip down to Skidoo to register his birth and sell furs. The town had grown since their last visit, with new buildings and more people. They attracted some attention, the mountain man and his wife with their baby, but it was friendly curiosity rather than anything threatening. The preacher who'd married them was delighted to meet James. "Fine boy," he said, blessing the baby. "You've built a good life up there on that mountain." "The best life," Henry agreed, his arm around Violet's shoulders. They stayed in town only long enough to complete their business, then climbed back to their mountain sanctuary. Both of them preferred the solitude and peace of their cabin to the noise and crowding of town. As James grew from baby to toddler, he showed himself to be his father's son in build and his mother's in temperament. He was large for his age and rarely fussed, content to observe the world with serious blue eyes that had shifted to a deep brown like his father's. "He's going to be tall," Violet predicted, watching 18-month-old James toddle around the cabin with determined steps. "Look at those long legs. Takes after his old man, though I hope he gets your brains and sense. I think he'll have both, the best of us combined." When James was 2, Violet announced she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she wasn't carrying the weight of trauma from her first marriage anymore. She was healthy and happy, glowing with the confidence of a woman secure in her life and love. Their daughter arrived on a warm August day with far less drama than James's winter birth. She came quickly, as if eager to meet her family, and she was tiny and perfect with a cap of light brown hair. "Hannah," Violet said immediately upon seeing her. "Her name is Hannah, after your mother." Henry had mentioned his mother only a few times, dead now for many years from a fever that swept their Illinois town. That Violet would honor her memory moved him deeply. "Hannah Grace Grayson," he said. "It's perfect, just like her." James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his chubby toddler hands. They supervised carefully, teaching him to be gentle, and he proved to be a sweet and protective big brother. The cabin that had once housed a solitary man now rang with the sounds of family. Baby coos and toddler chatter, Violet singing while she worked, Henry's deep voice telling stories in the evening. The isolation that had once been about hiding became a choice they made together, preferring their mountain paradise to the complications of town life. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James and Hannah thrived in the mountain air, growing strong and healthy. Henry taught his children about the land, how to read weather and animal signs, how to move quietly through the forest and respect the creatures that lived there. Violet taught them letters and numbers, reading and practical skills. When James was 6 and Hannah 4, Violet announced another pregnancy, their last, she said firmly. This time she carried twins, 2 boys born in the spring who they named Matthew and Lucas. The cabin that had seemed spacious for 2 now bulged at the seams with a family of 6. "We need to expand," Henry said, looking at his sleeping family. Violet exhausted but content in the bed, the twins in the cradle he'd hastily built when they realized there were 2 babies, James and Hannah, sleeping on pallets nearby. "Next summer," Violet agreed. "We'll add 2 more rooms. One for the boys, one for Hannah as she gets older." They built the addition together, Henry doing the heavy work while Violet helped with planning and finishing touches. James, now 7, was old enough to hand tools and feel like he was contributing. The expanded cabin was comfortable and well made, a true family home. Life was hard in the ways that mountain living was always hard. Winters were long and supplies sometimes ran short. There were illnesses and injuries, a terrible week when Hannah had a fever that wouldn't break and they feared losing her. There were lean years when pelts were scarce and money tight, but there was also joy. First steps and first words, James's pride when he shot his first rabbit at age 8. Hannah's delight in the wildflowers she'd pick and arrange in jars around the cabin. The twins' identical mischief that drove Violet to distraction and Henry to laughter. There were quiet evenings after the children were asleep when Henry and Violet would sit by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, content in the life they'd built together. "You ever miss it?" Violet asked one such evening. "The town, other people, civilization?" "No." "Do you?" "Not even a little. Everything I want is right here. Any regrets? About how we started, about leaving your old life behind?" Violet thought about it seriously. "I regret marrying Thomas in the first place. I regret not seeing what he was sooner. But I don't regret running, and I certainly don't regret finding you. If I hadn't run when I did, I might not have survived to have this life. So no real regrets. Just gratitude that I had the courage to knock on your door that night." Henry kissed the top of her head. "Best knock I ever heard." As the children grew older, they occasionally asked about the wider world beyond their mountain. Henry and Violet told them about towns and cities, but also about the complications and dangers that came with them. They were honest about Violet's first marriage, age-appropriately explaining that she'd been hurt and had to leave, but that sometimes running from danger was the bravest thing you could do. "Did Papa save you?" Hannah asked when she was 8, old enough to understand the story. "Yes," Violet said simply. "He saw that I needed help and he gave it without asking for anything in return. That's what good people do." "I want to be like Papa when I grow up," James declared. "Strong and brave and good." "Then you're well on your way," Henry told his son. "Being good is a choice you make every day, and you're already making that choice." The children grew strong and capable under their parents' guidance. James developed into a skilled hunter and tracker, responsible and serious like his father. Hannah was curious and intelligent, with a gift for drawing and a tender heart for injured animals. The twins were inseparable, 2 halves of a mischievous whole, but good boys underneath the pranks. When James turned 15, he asked if he could accompany Henry on the next trip to Skidoo. It was time, Henry decided. His son needed to see something beyond the mountain, to understand the world he'd chosen to live apart from. The trip was educational for James, who found town life noisy and strange after mountain quiet. He was polite to the townspeople, but clearly uncomfortable with so many strangers in close quarters. On the climb back up to the cabin, he seemed relieved. "I'm glad we live where we do," he told Henry. "I don't think I could stand being around so many people all the time. It's not for everyone. But it's good to know what's out there to make an informed choice about how you want to live. I want to live like you and Mama, maybe have my own cabin someday, deeper in the mountains, raise a family in the wild places." Henry felt a swell of pride. "Then that's what you'll do. The mountain teaches you everything you need to know, and you've been a good student." Hannah, when her turn came at 13, had a different reaction to town. She was fascinated by the general store's goods, the different people, the energy of civilization. But she too was happy to return home, declaring that visiting was nice but living there would be too much. The twins went together at 12 and spent the entire time counting the minutes until they could leave, unimpressed by everything except the candy at the general store. As the children entered their teen years, Henry and Violet faced the reality that their family wouldn't always be together on the mountain. Eventually, the children would want lives of their own. It was bittersweet, this knowledge that the loud, chaotic household would someday quiet. But that was still years away. For now, they had dinners around the table Henry had built to accommodate their growing family. They had Christmas mornings with simple gifts and complex joy. They had summer evenings teaching the children to fish in the mountain streams, winter afternoons reading books aloud while snow piled against the windows. They had a life built from nothing, from a desperate knock on a door and a mountain man's simple declaration, "You're safe now." Violet often thought about that night, about the girl she'd been, desperate and hurting and hopeless. She'd thought she was asking for work for survival. She'd found so much more: love, safety, purpose, family, joy. Henry had given her all of that with his immediate acceptance and protection. And she'd given him something too, drawing him out of isolation and back into life, helping him see that his past didn't have to define his future. They'd saved each other, really. Two broken people finding wholeness together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, marked by the date of their ceremony in Skidoo, though they'd been together longer, the children conspired to give them a rare day alone. James, now 22 and courting a trapper's daughter he'd met on a trip to town, took his siblings on an overnight camping trip to a lake 2 miles from the cabin. Henry and Violet found themselves alone in the cabin for the first time in years. It felt strange and a little too quiet without the children's constant noise and activity. "What should we do with ourselves?" Violet asked, laughing. "I have a few ideas," Henry said, pulling her into his arms with a grin that still made her heart flutter after all these years. They made love in the afternoon like they were young and childless again, then lay together in the bed, listening to the mountain sounds through the open window. 20 years, Violet said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday I knocked on that door. Other times it feels like I've been yours forever. You have been mine forever. Just took us a while to find each other in time and space." Henry traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Any regrets now, 2 decades in? Only that I didn't run sooner and find you earlier. We could have had more years together. We have the years we have, and they've been good ones, the best of my life. Mine too. You know, when I was married to Thomas, I used to dream about escape, but I could never imagine what came after. I couldn't picture a happy life because I didn't think I deserved one. Then I found you, and you showed me that I did deserve happiness, that I could have it if I was brave enough to reach for it. You've always been brave. From that first knock on my door, you've been the bravest person I know." They talked until sunset, about everything and nothing, relearning each other in the quiet that their busy family life rarely afforded. When the children returned the next day, noisy and full of stories about their adventure. Henry and Violet exchanged a smile over their heads. This was their life. Full, loud, messy, and absolutely perfect. Years continued to pass. James married his trapper's daughter and built his own cabin 50 miles north, carrying on the mountain life in his own way. Hannah eventually decided she wanted to try teaching, moving to a larger town in the valley where she could attend normal school and prepare for certification. The twins, true to form, did everything together, including joining a logging operation in the mountains, working as a team. The cabin grew quiet again as the children left to build their own lives. Henry and Violet, now in their 40s, found themselves in a new phase of life. They were grandparents now, James and his wife having provided 2 grandchildren who occasionally visited the mountain cabin. "It's strange," Violet said one evening as they sat in their familiar spots by the fire. "The cabin feels too big now with just the 2 of us. Maybe, but it also feels right. We started alone together and here we are again, come full circle. I miss the noise sometimes. The chaos of 4 children all needing different things at once. I miss it too. But I also like this, just you and me. We can hear ourselves think. We can talk without interruption. We can make love in the middle of the day without worrying about little ears hearing." Violet laughed. There is that benefit. They settled into their new normal, still trapping and hunting but with less urgency now. They had savings from years of careful management, and their needs were simple. The garden still provided vegetables. The mountain still provided game, and they still provided for each other. On Violet's 45th birthday, Henry surprised her with a trip down to San Francisco. They'd never traveled together beyond trips to Skidoo, and Violet hadn't seen her hometown in nearly 30 years. The city had changed dramatically, but some things remained the same. Violet showed Henry the street where her mother's boarding house had stood, now replaced by a larger building. They walked along the waterfront, visited museums and parks, experienced city life together. "It's wonderful to visit," Violet said on their last evening, watching the sun set over the bay. "But I'm ready to go home. To the mountain. To wherever you are, that's home to me." They returned to their cabin with relief, happy to trade city noise for mountain quiet. The trip had been a nice adventure, but it only reinforced what they already knew. They belonged on that mountain, in that cabin they'd built into a home together. More years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, in grandchildren's visits and letters from their scattered children. Henry's beard went completely gray, and Violet's dark hair acquired threads of silver. Their hands became marked with age spots and work calluses, but they still fit together perfectly when they walked hand in hand through the forest. On their 35th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren gathered for a rare, full family reunion, Henry stood to make a toast. 35 years ago, I was alone in this cabin, thinking I'd live and die alone. Then Violet knocked on my door and everything changed. She brought life and light and love into my isolation. Together, we built this family, this legacy. I want all of you to know that the best decision I ever made was opening that door and saying you're safe now. Because in saving her, I saved myself too. Violet wiped tears from her eyes as their children and grandchildren applauded. And I want all of you to know that bravery comes in many forms. Sometimes it's standing and fighting. Sometimes it's running toward something better. I ran from danger and toward hope, and I found your father waiting to catch me. That's what family does, what love does. It catches you when you fall and helps you stand again. James raised his glass. To Mama and Papa, who taught us that home isn't a place, it's the people you choose to love. They all drank to that, and the celebration continued long into the night with music and laughter and stories. Henry watched his family, counting his blessings. 4 healthy children who'd grown into good adults, 8 grandchildren with more surely coming, and the woman at his side who'd made it all possible. As the years advanced into their 60s, Henry and Violet slowed down but never stopped. They still tended the garden together, still took walks through the forest, still sat by the fire in the evenings sharing the comfortable silence of people who'd spent a lifetime together. When Henry's joints began to ache with age and arthritis, Violet made him salves from the same herbs he'd once used on her bruises. When Violet's eyes grew weak for close work, Henry read aloud to her in the evenings, just as she'd once read to their children. They took care of each other with the same devotion they'd always shared, growing old together with grace and gratitude. On a warm summer evening, when Henry was 68 and Violet 63, they sat on the bench outside their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. 4 decades had passed since that desperate knock on the door that changed everything. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Violet asked, her hand in his. "I said a lot of things. You said I was safe. You're safe now, that's what you told me, and I have been every day since, safe and loved and home." Henry lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in the same gesture he'd used 40 years earlier. "And you gave me the same gift, safety and love and home. Everything I needed and didn't know to ask for." They sat together as the sun sank below the peaks, 2 people who'd found each other in the wilderness and built a life that exceeded anything they dared to dream. Behind them, the cabin stood solid and strong, filled with memories of a family raised and a love that had endured every test. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth. Somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled its evening call. Stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had shone down on a desperate woman and a lonely man the night their paths converged. "I love you, Henry Grayson," Violet said softly. "I love you, Violet Grayson," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." They remained there until full darkness fell, reluctant to leave the perfect peace of the moment. Then, hand in hand, they went inside their cabin, closing the door on another day in the life they'd built together, a life that had started with 3 desperate knocks and a mountain man's promise of safety. In the years that followed, their love story became family legend, told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The cabin on the mountain remained standing, maintained by descendants who understood its significance as the birthplace of their family's legacy. Henry and Violet lived into their late 70s, their minds sharp even as their bodies weakened. They died within 6 months of each other, Henry first from pneumonia one harsh winter, Violet following him in the spring, her heart simply giving out as if it knew it was time to join her husband. They were buried side by side on a hillside near the cabin, under the pines they'd loved, with a simple marker that read, "Henry and Violet Grayson together forever." Their children gathered to mourn, but also to celebrate a life well lived, and a love that had transformed 2 broken people into something whole and beautiful. The story of how they met became a treasured family tale, passed down through generations. How Violet had run from danger and found safety. How Henry had opened his door and his heart. How they'd built a life and family in the wilderness. The cabin remained in the family, used by various descendants over the years as a retreat, a reminder of where it all began. Some said on quiet evenings, you could feel the presence of Henry and Violet there still, their love so strong it had soaked into the very timbers of the place. And perhaps that was true. Perhaps love like theirs didn't simply end with death, but continued on, woven into the fabric of the place where it had flourished. The mountains certainly remembered them, the wind carrying echoes of their laughter, the streams reflecting memories of their walks, the trees standing sentinel over the life they'd shared. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story of she who knocked, and he who answered, of bruises healed and safety given, of two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole. It was a story about bravery and kindness, about second chances and true love, about building something beautiful from broken pieces. It was a story that began with 3 desperate knocks on a cabin door and a mountain man's simple promise, "You're safe now." Those 4 words had changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations, a testament to the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Henry and Violet gave to those who came after them. Proof that it's never too late to start over, that broken people can heal and thrive, and that true love, when it comes, is worth every risk, every fear, every desperate knock on a stranger's door in the wilderness.